Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us here at Webster Memorial United Church for our Bible studies in the book of Genesis. We have been looking at different themes and different personalities in the book of Genesis. And so it is not necessarily a logical reading from the first chapter to the next. Reverend Stevens, over the past 2 weeks, has been considering the life of Joseph. And I thought to myself, why not continue a little reflection on Joseph's life? Reverend Stevens has looked at I will not bow and I will not bend as critical pieces of Joseph's character expressions and convictions concerning the principle of right that must be pursued and defended as a tribute to the God whom Joseph served. And maybe I should call this study, I Will Not Break. I will not break my commitment to the building of peace and the facilitating of grace in my relationships, despite the pain and dislocation that these relationships represent. Turn your Bible with me to Genesis chapter 45, and let us look together at verse 1 through to verse 11. This is where Joseph reveals himself to his brothers. Are you ready? Have you found it? Let us read. Then Joseph could no longer control himself before all his attendants, and he cried out, "Have everyone leave my presence." So there was no one with Joseph when he made himself known to his brothers. And he wept so loudly that the Egyptians heard him, and Pharaoh's household heard about it. Joseph said to his brothers, "I am Joseph. Is my father still living?" But his brothers were not able to answer him because they were terrified at his presence. Then Joseph said to his brothers, "Come close to me." When they had done so, he said, "I am your brother Joseph, the one you sold into Egypt. And now do not be distressed and do not be angry with yourselves for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you. For 2 years now there has been famine in the land, and for the next 5 years there will be no plowing and reaping. But God sent me ahead of you to preserve for you a remnant on earth and save your lives by a great deliverance. So then it was not you who sent me here, but God. He made me father to Pharaoh, lord of his entire household and ruler of all Egypt. Now hurry back to my father and say to him, 'This is what your son Joseph said. God has made me lord of all Egypt. Come down to me, don't delay. You shall live in the region of the Goshen and be near me. You, your children and grandchildren, your flocks and herds, and all you have. I will provide for you there.'" My friends, there are some words of Joseph that echo the sentiments I will not break. I wonder if you can identify those words. The words are, "Come close to me." Come close to me. You know, for those of us who have read the entire story of Joseph, now that we come upon these words, I'm sure we can sense in Joseph's heart a desire for connection, a longing for affection, a longing for relationship. You know, we live in a global space where the words "come close to me" are very relevant. Over the past 2 years, we have lost real connection with each other. And although the distance, this physical distance, served to preserve life, there are some very important sectors of our common life that have been jeopardized because of the distance. I'm sure you can name some. Think about our mental health. Think about our sense of connection that has taken a beating. Think about relationships within our families and our friendships too, which have been disrupted. The effect of the war on Ukraine and the gun violence in the United States, religious persecution in the East, and criminal activity in Jamaica are all calling out loudly to humanity that we should come to the table of conversation so that stability and sustainability of life may be experienced. Truly, the earth seems to be giving way, and the mountains of values that have sustained us for generations are quaking and falling into the heart of the sea of humanistic philosophies and this thrust for rights without responsibility. According to Romans chapter 8, verse 19, the creation waits in eager expectation for the children of God to be revealed. And that is why I like this part of Joseph's story. In Joseph, we find a paradigm for the shalom that God wishes us to experience. Now, my friends, shalom, this wholeness, this sense of peace, does not necessarily mean the absence of trouble. But it really means a positive regard for wholeness of life and concord in our relationships. Shalom is that tripartite experience of synchronicity that is worth striving for. Peace with the self, peace with the other, and peace with God. And such is the synchronicity that we cannot have one without the other. And this is what we see Joseph extending to his brothers as he says to them, "Come close to me." And here are some truths that he wants us to bear in mind, even as we stand with him and declare to each other, "Come close to me. I will not break my commitment to peace building." He wants us to understand, firstly, that this matter of pursuing shalom, this matter of peace building, is a risk-taking venture. You see, there is no relationship building without a risk. There is no brokering of peace without risk. Think about it. You extend the olive branch, but you do not know if it will be received. You offer goodwill, but you are not sure if it will be reciprocated. But friends, it is a risk that must be taken. It is a work of vulnerability, but it is a vulnerability that we must face. Now I want you to look again at this story and look at Joseph. Joseph was vulnerable to the natural human surging desire for retribution. Look at his entire life story. And I want you to stand in that room with him as he has to recount all that has happened to him from the age of 17. And see if he doesn't have right to entertain the desire for retribution. Tell me if he doesn't have the right to demand an eye for an eye. Think of it. Your murder is plotted by your brothers. He is thrown into a pit. And despite him calling out and crying out, his brothers sat there and ate lunch. He was then sold by his brothers to their cousins, the Ishmaelites. He was sold as a slave by his cousins into a land where he knew nobody. He was 17 years old in a country where he couldn't speak the language. And despite the hustle that he engaged in, and despite his hard work, despite his honesty, he is thrown into prison in Egypt. He helped people in prison. They forgot him. And although he eventually climbed up the ranks to be second in command to Pharaoh, one cannot help but wonder how many nights he dreamt of the moment when he would look in his brother's eyes and pay them back for what they did. You know, some of us who are watching this Bible study, you've been there. You've been abused. You've been mistreated. And probably you said to yourself, boy, if I ever get into Joseph's position, some people going to feel it. But you see, Joseph had a choice to make. He had to choose between his anger and his relationships. Isn't that often the choice we have to make? He had to choose between hatred and harmony. He had to choose between acrimony and affection. He had a choice to make between bitterness and forgiveness. And although it may have been a risk, somehow Joseph felt that the contentment of his soul depended on the risk for that which was right. You know, there's a story I like to tell. People at Webster are probably very tired of it, but it is of a snake that slithered into a carpentry shop one night. And as it made its way through the carpentry shop, it went up on a table and slid across the table. But as it slid across the table, its body got caught on the table saw. In quick response, it turned and it bit the saw. Now, recognizing that its mouth became bloodied, the snake wrapped itself around the saw and began to squeeze the saw. And the more the snake squeezed the saw, the more it got cut. And its very desire for retribution led to its demise. Joseph knew that harboring bitterness is like drinking poison and waiting for the other person to die. So he chose the high road of risk-taking in pursuit of shalom, in pursuit of peace building, in pursuit of his relationship. He takes the initiative and he says to his brothers, come close to me. Come close to me, not that I might slap you. Come close to me, not for me to stare you down and show you how you have failed to destroy me. Come close to me, not for me to rub your nose in your misdeed. Come close to me, for I am still working out this forgiveness, even as I have sought to already forgive you. I'm giving you access into my space. I'm giving you access to my heart. I'm giving you access into my place of being. Do you see the vulnerability that peace building, peacemaking, this pursuit of shalom endears us to? And the funny thing is that Joseph was offering what he himself needed. Come close to me. I'm giving you the opportunity to break bread with me. I'm giving you the opportunity to drink wine with me. Come close to me. I want to start over. I want to understand how we can fix this thing. Come close to me. I want to hear what is on your heart. And I don't want to hear in order to respond. I want to hear so that I can understand. Come close to me. I want to interpret your body language. I want reconciliation. It's risky. It's not easy. But the truth is that, what's the alternative? You know the alternative. And the alternative is not healthy. The alternative causes a withering of the soul and a wilting of the spirit. The alternative creates a chasm of separation. Come close to me. You know, some of us watching this Bible study, we need to hear it from somebody else. We need to say it to somebody else. Maybe it's a family member. Maybe it's a church member. Maybe it's a co-worker. Maybe it's a friend. What will you do? And guess what, friends? This story, is so powerful. Because the subtle injunction of this story is that we must not wait for the other person to come. But spurred by a deep appreciation of the melody that can be created when broken chords are mended, we take the initiative to fix the instruments of our relations so that our humanity can resound like the orchestra we are called to be. Joseph teaches you and me that wholesome relationships cannot be constructed in a context of retribution. Joseph shows you and me that in this business of coming close, this business of shalom making and peace building, this matter of operating in grace, is a context where my quest for deep, meaningful, healthy relationships trumps my right to retaliate. For you see, friends, when I'm set on defending my rights out of a desire for retribution, I run the risk of not only undermining any hope of reconciliation, but to satisfy my anger, it may very well lead me to undermine your personhood. And then if I act in that way, I would be governed by self-interest. And when self-interest becomes the main interest, there will never be peace. There'll never be shalom. There'll never be that kind of harmony that God desires. So instead of being retributive, Joseph is showing you and me that this pursuit of shalom, this peacemaking, this relationship building as a virtue principle for a stable life, a stable community, a stable nation, stable church, stable world, must be reconciliatory. It must be rehabilitative. It must be redemptive. It must be restorative. And this is where we often have a problem, because it is something to be extended to those who even deserve their suffering. There's a second thought that we must bear in mind. This pursuit of shalom, this peacemaking and this peace building that says, come close to me, is not only a risk-taking venture, but it is a resource-investing venture. Have you ever stopped to think what it took for Joseph to get to the place where he could say, come close to me? Do you think it happened overnight? No, it didn't. I'm sure he had several conversations with himself. I'm sure that he had several conversations with God. My friends, the move to mending fractured relationships is not always immediate. The desire is not always immediate. And the steps to reconciliation don't happen overnight. And although it is a need that we have, the truth is that it is difficult to do. You know, when you read this story of Joseph, I think it shows up your story and mine. We recognize the necessity for reconciliation, but we just cannot overlook the difficulty of it. Now, I'm sure that at this point somebody may be asking, does my quest for a relationship overlook the wrong that was done? Do I just sweep everything under the carpet and behave as if nothing happened? My dear friends, the answer is no. We're not called to be peace lovers, you know. We're not just to be keepers of the peace. You see, peace lovers and peacekeepers, they like the cessation of hostilities without dealing with the fundamental causes of the hostilities. We must note that there's a difference between making a truce and making peace. A truce just says that, you know, we won't shoot each other for a while. But peacemaking requires that truth is known, that the matter is trashed out, and that parties come to a consensus as to how to proceed. So what am I saying? I'm really just putting it on the table that peacemaking is hard work. It requires creative thought. It calls for sustained dialogue. It includes the monitoring and the managing of emotions. It demands deliberate action. I want you to notice in this text that Joseph didn't skirt around the issue. Notice how he spoke with his brothers. He said, I am your brother Joseph, the one you sold into Egypt. So he put the issue squarely on the table. The brothers were made to face their wrong, but Joseph did it not in a way to demean them, but rather as an entry point to dialogue for relationship building. And he highlights to you and me, you know, that fundamentally this pursuit of shalom, this pursuit of wholesome relationships, this pursuit of peace, the building of it and the making of it, is really a heart issue. And the way we handle those we consider indebted to us is very crucial to the creation and the expression of shalom. It always amazes me the kinds of resources that Joseph invests into this peacemaking process. He invests his emotions. If you read the entire story, you'll see how many times Joseph wept. His heart was stirred. And in chapter 45 verse 2, I mean, he wept so loudly that the whole Egyptian household heard the anguish of his soul. Despite the difficulty of reconciliation, despite the risk, Joseph longed for relationship. And I've come to find out that the efforts at peacemaking are created in the somber environs of the longing heart. And I wonder if there's a challenge here to you and me that our hearts must break every time we encounter a situation of fracture. When we hear of dissonance in our homes, or division in the church, or discord in our communities, or dislocation in our country, it must tear our consciences and it must cause us to weep. But weeping is one thing. Joseph shows us that accompanying the weeping must be an exercise of the will. So he says to his brothers, God sent me here to save your lives. Look in verse 7, that's what he says. You shall live in the region of the Goshen and be near me. You, your children and grandchildren, your flocks and herds and all you have. I will provide for you there. Joseph would spare no resources at ensuring that a context for the flourishing of life was created. That is what peacemaking is all about. That is the essence of shalom. That is the essence of pursuing healthy and wholesome relationships. Doing everything we must to facilitate the flourishing of life. So the question probably should be, how can we ensure that our homes become sanctuaries for people who are broken and battered and bruised? How can our churches become that true haven of respite and rebuilding? How can we ensure that our personhood become that embodiment of truth and justice and mercy, grace? You see, as peacekeepers, well, we're not peacekeepers merely, as peacemakers, we cannot adopt the see no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil mentality, because that only threatens the health of community. As peacemakers, we have work to do. We have to position ourselves to garner whatever skills we need to truly be salt and light of the earth, to help with the building of our relationships. But I want to say something in closing. I will not break my commitment to pursuing peace and to pursuing shalom in my relationships. This come close to me. It's not just a risk-taking venture. It's not just a resource investing venture. But you know what? Ultimately, it is a response to divine initiative. Do you know why Joseph was able to take the risk and say, come close? Do you know why Joseph could have invested all the resources that he did in this venture to rebuild relationships? It's because he had a relationship with the Prince of Peace. Didn't you hear him speak in verse 5? Because it was to save lives, God sent me here ahead of you. In verse 7 he says, but God sent me here ahead of you to preserve for you a remnant on earth and to save your lives by a great deliverance. So then, in verse 8 he says, so then it was not you who sent me here, but God. In verse 10 he says, God has made me Lord of all Egypt. Come down to me, don't delay. You meant it for evil, but God meant it for good. You meant it for my demise, but God caused it so that I could save life. 4 times in 11 verses, Joseph speaks of the fact that divine fingers were weaving the fabric of his life. The divine shuttle was moving back and forth, stretching the yarn of his experiences, blending his pain and his fortunes, creating a tapestry of grace and beauty. As a matter of fact, if you look in chapter 41, the naming of his children is testament to this. He named his firstborn Manasseh, saying, God, you took away my esteem. He named his second son Ephraim, saying, God, you blessed me despite my challenges. Joseph had come close to God, so he could invite his brothers to come close to him. The message is simple, my friends. Only when we surrender to Almighty God, the giver and the author of peace, can we properly institute peace. Only when you and I bend the knee to the will and the way of the Prince of Peace can the virtues of the Prince of Peace be displayed. Peace is ultimately a heart issue. So my friends, when God sits on the throne of our hearts, when God controls the power of our will, when God really changes a person's mind, when God sanctifies a soul, when God energizes your spirit with new life and new wine, you cannot help but declare, I will not break my commitment at pursuing peace. What will you do? Who do you need to say, come close to me to? How will you engage that come close to me? As difficult as it is. How will you respond to divine initiative so that you can take the risk and ensure that the resources are employed for the building of your relationship. May God grant you grace. May God grant us all grace as we continue to pursue peace.